So hi there, welcome to another episode of Tip Top Tips Edu with me, Mark Anderson, as part of the Net Support's offer on social media via our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/NetSupportGroup, and our Net Support Radio podcast as well. The purpose of these shows is to have a really good catch up and a chat with some of the world's most leading influencers and educators who have lots of things to say around teaching, learning and leadership. Sometimes with technology, sometimes without. But today I'm pretty confident with the guest I have on the show with me today. We're going to have lots of conversations about technology, leadership and teaching and learning. It's a bit strange for me with the guest I have on today, someone I've known for a very long time. I think we first met face-to-face, IRL as it were, back at the Apple Distinguished Educators Institute in 2013. It might have been when I met him in Istanbul when I was speaking at an EdTech event there. Or it might have been at Schiphol Airport where we bumped into each other. Or it might have been at Dubai Airport where we bumped into each other. We bump into each other all over the place. But he's someone I've known for a long time who shares the same sort of vision and values that I do around teaching and learning with technology for effective and purposeful ways. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce on to the Tip Top Tips Edu show today, Mr. Abdul Chohan. Welcome to the show, Abdul. How are you doing?
Wonderful, Mark. Great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Great introduction. And here we are, not at an airport and not in another country.
I know. I mean, the story that I share with people about that time when I saw you at Schiphol was I ended up missing my plane, didn't I? I had to stay in Schiphol Airport overnight until the next morning. I completely missed my flight. Right. And you're like, but I'm back in Manchester, mate. Where? For those that don't know you, Abdul, and welcome, you're very welcome. It's lovely to have a chance to have a conversation with you today. Can you just share a little bit about your career to date and what it is that you're up to and where you are with your work now, please?
Oh yeah, okay. So that kind of taking me back now, kind of make me feel old, but so I actually didn't start off as a teacher when I left university. I was, funnily enough, working for a pharmaceutical firm. I used to do research for a pharmaceutical firm. And then shortly after that, I went into teacher training. I trained at the University of Leicester. And then I moved back up north, my hometown in Bolton, where I then got a supply teacher job as a chemistry teacher. And then I kind of stayed there ever since, kind of, if you like you say. I think one thing that was kind of really interesting was for me, like school and teaching and education, it's never been boring. You never get the same day twice. I absolutely loved that role as a teacher, being in the classroom, became a senior leader. We did that for a number of years. That was at ESA Academy, as a lot of people know in the UK. We did some quite innovative stuff with technology there at the time, which kind of was quite amazing and quite fascinating in many ways as well. And that was a big learning curve for me. And then shortly after that, I was on a sabbatical for a couple of years working with different projects in different countries and so on. I really enjoyed doing that as well. Came back to the school and took on a principal stroke CEO type role for a year or so. And then after that, I suppose I've been for the last 3-4 years still working kind of independently with schools in different parts of the countries, hence all the airport travel and so on. I think if I said yes to everything, I probably would not need a house to live in. I think I could just move from one place to another place. And then just very recently, since last year, I've now kind of taken on this role as VP of Learning at Shobi, which has been pretty exciting as well.
Brilliant stuff, Abdul. I mean, I've seen you speak and present at many different events around the world. Sometimes we've been on there together. Sometimes it's been you by yourself. You sent me a nice photo from Betts just on an iMessage recently. We'll have to put that photo in the show notes. But clearly, we work in a very similar space. But as I mentioned in my little intro there, I've always been a huge sort of fan of the messages that you share about purposeful use of technology. It can be so gimmicky, but the potential for speeding up processes, reducing workload, saving money. That there are loads of things that you can do when it comes to thinking about teaching and learning and leadership with technology. Given the show's Tip Top Tips, I wonder if you could share some Tip Top Tips about leadership teams. So a significant amount of your work around Europe and beyond even has seen you supporting leadership teams with their leadership of teaching and learning with technology. So given the situation we find ourselves here in the UK, have you got any top tips that you could share with school leaders on how to make remote education work in their settings?
I suppose I can share some thoughts and ideas. Certainly for me, that whole kind of vision around technology is quite key. There's this kind of short-term response that schools are having to do. Sometimes that's because of financial constraints and so on. But don't forget the longer picture and the potential for where you might want to be in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, 5 years' time. I'm a real advocate for one-to-one technology. I believe every student should have access to technology, the right type of technology. It's up to the schools which technology they want to buy, and I think that should be based on a learning decision. But I think certainly at this moment in time, the need for that has kind of proved itself in many ways. And coming from a community where deprivation index has been quite high, for me, the access to technology with the right kind of learning sequences and everything in place has actually been quite key. So for me, it's that longer vision of how do we get to that point, moving away from computer rooms and trolleys with devices stored in and so on. I think that vision aspect must always kind of be there. And I suppose for me, I think for our government as well, to have that kind of a vision around where actually the idea of every child having access to a computer for learning should be quite key. And we know that this technology now exists that stops things like distractions, and it's got a lot more simple and reliable. And that would be my second point. First one's the vision. The second would be make sure whatever you use is simple and reliable. When I was presenting, I always had one slide that kind of said that simplicity and reliability. These are, for me, two key ingredients without which technology doesn't work. If we go back and look at some of our most successful technology implementations going back 20 years, 30 years in education, most would probably say it's the overhead projector, because it was really simple, really reliable, one switch, put it on, and so on. And some of our failures sometimes, maybe I would say, maybe not all the time, but I certainly saw this, was like the interactive whiteboard, with so many connections and training and all of that. And even then, people were just using the projector and not the interactivity part and so on. So that's the other part. Whatever you use, make sure it's simple and reliable. Otherwise, technology and can become like gym membership. You pay for it, no one's using it, kind of thing. And you can also kind of instill fear in teachers and in people to say, hey, this might not work, and have that kind of anxiety coming in that what if this doesn't work, and so on. So for me, test it for simplicity and reliability, and I think that's really kind of quite key for me. And finally, I suppose if it was my third tip, I would probably say focus on the plumbing. So if you think about devices as like taps, I always give this kind of example. Taps are shiny, you turn them on, you expect water to come out. But the water doesn't come from the tap, it comes from all the plumbing that's behind it. So it's easy to give devices out, although some would disagree with that because it's quite expensive and not every child has access to a device even. But even when we have the device, that's not the end of the solution. We then have to think about the plumbing, and that's the teaching and learning, sequencing of lessons, retrieval practice, assessment, and then adding the value of technology. What does tech allow us to do now that we couldn't do before? And that is the additional extra, the return on investment that we should expect with technology. And if we can wire that into the plumbing and build it in, and that's design and bespoke for each school, actually, that will be quite a powerful environment to be in.
So some great advice there, Abdul. I love the analogies as well, because sometimes it's quite difficult, isn't it, for people to actually understand what a good one looks like and how it works, and having a story upon which to hang that off of, with the taps and the plumbing example there, for example. It's a great way for people to sort of get a hook onto that. It's interesting you mentioned the importance of children having one-to-one devices as well. I mean, so I've seen actual teachers struggling to actually have access to a device themselves. So many schools have actually spent so much money putting in desktop PCs and hardwiring to the front of the classroom and all these different things. Well, under lockdown, where people can't even go into school, even they're being sort of supported to work from home and all these sorts of things, these sort of messages. Again, it's really imperative that teachers have access to a device which enables teaching and learning in these ways as well. It's been really tough, hasn't it, the past 5 months, but such a steep learning curve.
Yeah, I think every industry at the moment has probably been pushed forward by so many years, whatever numbers people are quoting, with respect to the use of technology. Even in kind of industry, non-education kind of environment. I was listening to the radio the other day, and how some employers have allowed their kind of staff to come in and take the technology home that would normally be in the office. And I think mobility is really important. Mobile devices, laptop type devices, tablets. I think these are really kind of powerful tools. The fact that you can just move with it and take it and work to your convenience, I think that potentially could add to well-being. There's an element of, but yes, if you take it home, am I going to be doing emails at crazy hours and so on? And I think there's an element of self-learning that needs to happen, that you've got to be able to say no and switch off as well. That's important. But I think, the way in which the industry, as far as technology is concerned, is developing in terms of mobile devices, I just think it's a lot more faster than kind of desktops and desktop applications and so on as well. Not to say that there's not a place for laptops and so on, but I'm not so sure about desktops anymore. Maybe a dedicated computer room for ICT or coding or programming potentially. But I kind of see that the laptop, tablet kind of device are really kind of taking over that environment, and teachers should absolutely, like you say, have access to that. It's a very scary notion to say, if teachers don't have access to that kind of technology and are still expected to do remote learning and so on, that's kind of a very dire situation.
It really is. And one of the things you mentioned there, Abdul, I think is one of the sort of and it's difficult to find highlights really with the experiences we've had globally the past 12 months. But with my education hat on, it's just been great to see, because the work that I do, and I guess to a large extent for yourself as well, prior to where we're both at now, has been actually giving schools, teachers, leaders that confidence and competence in using technology. And sometimes it's been difficult to actually get people to sort of jump in at the deep end, where the pandemic has actually meant we've all had to jump in at the deep end, regardless of where we're at with our confidence and competence. And that's what was helped to sort of make that big jump that you alluded to, with a shift in terms of our usage and adoption and success, I guess, with technology.
Yeah.
Talking about teachers. Sorry, Abdul, carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think absolutely. During the first lockdown, I was doing webinars, about 6 webinars a day. There was, approximately 400 to 500 people, teachers that were joining from all over the world. Just wanting to know. I was just going through the workflow of Shobi and how you use it and how you set it up and so on. And the fact that it could work off a phone or work off a tablet or work off a laptop was something that was quite useful. But what was interesting for me to see was the types of countries from where teachers were joining. I remember speaking to a teacher from Rwanda, who within 24 hours were just using the free version and just managed to set things up so at least their children, she could be in communication with them and they could learn using just cellular networks and mobile devices and so on. But there was a lot of teachers, that willingness is there. That's the amazing thing about teachers. They want to learn, they want to have a go, they'll keep trying. And the number of teachers that I would kind of spoke to at that time through that month was just, I don't think over the last however many years I've been traveling, I've spoken to that many teachers in that short amount of time.
No, absolutely. I mean, that echoes my experiences as well with the Global EdTech Academy and all the other stuff that I do. Jumping into that sort of thinking about teachers, we shared some tips. You shared some tips a moment ago for school leaders. As you've alluded to, you've supported loads and loads of teachers in their use of technology, not just in the last 12 months, but beyond there as well. But what sort of top tips would you share with any teachers, educators listening today on how they could sort of rapidly develop their skills further if they were looking to do that? What tips could you share on that, please?
I think for teachers, one of the things that I definitely find where certainly over the last 5 years, 10 years, where technology has made significant improvements is the use of voice and video, and I think that should be something that should be now kind of second nature, be incorporated into the way in which teachers give feedback to students and so on. We were writing in books and purple pen and yellow pen and all that kind of stuff and so on. But actually, you can just hit a button and just talk and speak and give feedback and talk to kids, like you would normally. Okay, it's not the same as face-to-face, but it doesn't always have to be a Zoom call. It doesn't always have to be, a team setup. You could just press a button and send a voice note and just speak to the child. In the same way children can do that, technology like that exists. You can annotate documents with voice as well now, These features are actually quite powerful. And actually just before lockdown, there was a school that I've been working with in the UAE, Ajman Academy, where we actually developed a working policy that included the use of digitized verbal feedback, compared to kind of just written stuff that would happen. And, 6 or 7 seconds of verbal kind of feedback is probably like half a page of writing that would be very difficult for a teacher to do for every student. And also what was really interesting is that the way you speak to students verbally through a voice note, it's different with every student, even though in a written format, you might write the same comment because 2 students made exactly the same error. But actually, verbally, it's impossible to say exactly the same thing because there's all the psychological connect and your own relationship with that particular student and so on. And it's a lot more meaningful. And I think where this is amplified and been even more powerful is where teachers give verbal explanations or verbal feedback. The fact that parents can listen to that as well now, that puts parents in a better position to be able to support their children's learning. Video and screen recording on things like Loom. Shobi's got a feature that's got screen record built into it now. And the fact that you can model and explain something, it kind of really supports the whole sequencing learning, short-term to long-term memory, all that kind of stuff, because you can revisit and do that. But even the kind of the educational research piece aside, I think that whole kind of approach around screen recording and modeling, when I was at school, I would have to be in the class on a Monday morning at 10 o'clock to hear the chemistry teacher explain about, atomic structure. And if I missed that lesson, then the likelihood of me listening to that teacher in full force, in all his glory, kind of explaining the atomic structure is gone. And yes, I can go onto Khan Academy and I can go onto YouTube and watch videos, but it's not my teacher, and I think that's really important. But the fact that we now have technology that can capture that, and a student can watch that as many times as they want and kind of go back, go over potential, misconceptions, things that they didn't understand. And the fact that parents can watch that and support them at home, I think that's a significant kind of milestone for me. The number of parents that have historically said, well, I know how to do long division, but then the child says, yeah, but we don't do it like this in school, and and so on. Actually, that should be a conversation of the past, because there are tools that don't require, as you're aware, huge technical input. Press a button, scribble on, stop again, the video is done. It's not even back in the days of what file format do you want, where do you want to save it, how many frames per second. It just saves it, just does it, and it's there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I mean by simplicity and reliability. It's not asking you hard questions, it's just doing it for you. And as a teacher, you can focus. So for me, for teachers, I'd be saying, look at the incorporation of video and voice as part of your kind of workflow, as the way in which you're communicating. I think I was on a session with Daniel Muiz from Ofsted not so long ago, and he was talking about, that live lessons might not always be as useful. I mean, there's definite benefits for it, but actually the ability to record and have something that's recorded and shared, it might just be just as useful, if not even more, because students can access it, go back and listen to it again as well. So I think for me, that's really important. And I hope that after this pandemic is over, we should be able to kind of look at our policies, our approaches, our workflows, and we should be able to take our learning from this experience and be able to kind of do an education 3.0 or whatever it is, whatever number we're on at the moment.
10.0, I think. Yeah. And that's a great response, Abdul. Thank you. There's loads to unpick in there. I think what I mean, the one part where you're talking about use of your voice, I mean, the fact that you can be so much more efficient and say so much more in a shorter space of time, and you said sort of 7 seconds to half a page of actual writing, that's definitely true. But the thing that's missing with all of that, with actual text, is a nuance, isn't it? Like you were talking about, that relationship you have with each child would be different. The way I would explain something to you would be different to how I'd explain to somebody else, or give feedback to somebody else, and all those different things. Because teachers take on board all sorts of things: the emotional state of the young person, how they know them, the relationship they've got with them, their literacy, their knowledge of the subject, all those different things, which all come into play when you leave some audio feedback. And again, definitely with you on the sort of front of recording, either for delivering some content or even just for like annotating some feedback is super important. I'm minded of the Education Endowment Foundation report that came out back in March 19, and in there there's 4 different sort of areas in which technology can be able to help, and the 2 that sort of sting out for me, which this massively resonates with, the ways in which you can use technology to improve the quality of explanations and modeling. And the other one is about how technology can be used to improve the quality of feedback and assessment, and use of your voice and use of video, like in the way that you mentioned there, to massively tick those boxes. And of course, with Moore's law and the speed of processors these days, what used to take me, I'd record like 5 minutes feedback in something like, I don't know, explain everything on a Word document or something to a child, but then I was waiting half an hour for it to render afterwards to send through. Exactly. So much more quickly now, which means that it becomes much more doable, and teachers are much more able now to do those things and share them in much easier ways. So some fantastic ideas and feedback there, Abdul. Thank you very much. I want to dive into your role at Shobi. You mentioned Shobi a few times, and it's a tool that I used myself when I was still teaching in secondary. It's a tool that's been close to my heart for a significant amount of time. Your role at Shobi is kind of similar to the role I've got now at Net Support. What does your role involve, and what things that you're doing, the activities that you're doing? Is there anything there you think that could be some takeaways or some tips that people might have to take away based on the work that you're doing and how you're engaging with different people and schools and districts and whatnot?
My role, the role that I've got at Shobi, the title is VP or Vice President of Learning, which sounds very, very grand. But what I like about it, and the reason why I was kind of attracted to it, is really I'm speaking to leadership teams, multi-academy trusts. I'm speaking to school leaders here in the UK, internationally, and even teachers. And I'm actually just speaking about teaching and learning. Yes, we can talk about Shobi. We might talk about other tools and other apps and so on as well. But we're talking about digital strategy. We're talking about big picture stuff. We're talking about vision. We're talking about how does it actually make a difference. We're also talking about when not to use technology as well. And I think the role is kind of, it's something that, Shobi is kind of, really been really great to kind of develop, because they know it's not like it's not a commercial sales kind of thing or anything like that. It's actually focusing on how does it actually make a difference? Where's the impact? How do you support teachers and school leaders, maybe through webinars, maybe through training. In some cases, it's still kind of doing hands-on stuff in schools as well, development of policy for organizations and so on, implementation guides, vision plans, the essentials of planning beforehand and so on. These are kind of really, really important things that if you've not, as you know, if you've not been in a digital environment, if you've not really used technology to the extent at which someone like yourself might have done, then actually that support is quite welcome. So a lot of my conversations now are with head teachers, they're with school teams as well. So we had school the other day. Yes, they've implemented Shobi, but they really wanted to know about remote assessment. What does that look like? Now Shobi has kind of introduced this pretty amazing suite of tools now. So there's something called Class Kit. And within it, you have Shobi, you've got Socrative, Explain Everything, Educreations, Codable, Hongo. There's kind of a whole bunch of tools that really kind of connect with one another. And for me, kind of talking about assessment, we were talking about retrieval practice, we were talking about how do we collect data, how do we do learning checks, we were talking about progress over time, we were talking about looking at question level analysis that Socrative provides as well. So really it was all conversations about things that I really enjoy, but at the same time, just kind of, making teachers and school leaders aware that there's a whole ton of stuff that you can do now that you simply just couldn't do in the past. So it's just giving people that awareness of the types of workflows and the types of technologies there. So it's one thing, hey, you've bought Shobi and you've bought that, but then how do you actually make a difference in school? How do we know that it's being beneficial for children with special educational needs? How do we know that it's being used for language learning, for science, and so on? So this particular role kind of excited me around that. So yeah, so the shift to this, as well as kind of continuing to work with other schools and ministries in different countries as well.
That's brilliant. And as I sort of started with the outset of that question, so your role's very similar to mine. I'm going to share a resource myself now. I don't know if you've seen this, Abdul, but myself and Al Kingsley, Managing Director at Net Support, we wrote a guide to creating a school digital strategy, because we're having so many conversations, just as you're having with schools, about how to do the X, Ys, and the Zs and things. And so we felt it was really useful for us to share a document which schools could use. And it's not about any of the products at Net Support at all. It's just sharing salient advice that can help schools and teachers and leaders to make those sort of informed decisions about all those things. And you end up having conversations about management of technology, leadership of teaching and learning, how to do these different things, just like you've mentioned there. So lots and lots of parity between what we're doing. And it's lovely to have the opportunity to have you on to discuss these things with me today. Thank you, Abdul. I've got one more question just to wrap things up. I mean, I keep myself abreast of things you can do in Shobi as best as I can. When schools want to engage with me and do those sort of things, then I'll bring up my old classes from yesteryear that I've still got saved on my Shobi account. But if I was fresh to Shobi and didn't really know anything about it, other than, well, I can set some work on it, can't I? In it, sort of thing. What advice would you give? Sort of a beginner, medium, and advanced sort of level tips would you give for people using Shobi, perhaps?
Okay. So I suppose at beginner level, and I'll probably give this advice now because of the kind of current situation that we're in. But if I want to speak to all the students in my class, there's a voice note option, one tap, and I just speak, and it just records it and sends it to all the students, and they can hear me, and the students can do the same thing, and they can't hear each other, but actually I can see that. So I get this one-to-one voice communication thing with them, and at the same time I can just speak to all of them, and that's good. That's quite powerful. That's one thing that's really great. The second thing is, again, based on the modeling thing that we spoke about, there's a new feature in there called record screen. But what I really love about this that's different is it actually switches your front-facing camera on. So there's a little video of you that's running live. You can be, annotating keynotes, PowerPoints, Word documents, pages, whatever you want, images, and so on. And the children can see your expression, your face, and so on, and that's also available for students as well. And that for me is kind of, I suppose, intermediate, because the type of activity that you can set the students can now be significantly different. You can say, hey, use the record screen feature. Here's a piece of work or something, and I want you to annotate this, but speak and explain. And I think that there's a greater degree of cognitive demand that's required for that activity for students, because they have to speak and explain and write and so on. And there's a whole question of, hey, have they taken this from Google and so on? Do you know what? If they've taken it from Google and they can still do that, that's brilliant. That's learning, right? Because they've understood it. But it's not a cut and paste thing as an activity. So that's quite powerful. And I suppose the more advanced kind of features, I was speaking to a head teacher literally this morning of how she's being able to set up quality assurance, support teachers by having a structure where teachers, senior leaders, middle leaders can see what's going on in other classrooms. They can help other teachers. They can see where the strengths are and amplify that and get teachers to share that with others without having to kind of go in or call everybody together, in school and so on. And at the same time, where there might be, areas that need development, actually you can kind of see that and put the support in as well. So very supportive, and kind of the schools can build a whole kind of QA system around that as well. So that's kind of advanced level, if you want, which we're beginning to have conversations with schools and MATs about as well.
Brilliant stuff, Abdul. Thank you so much. I mean, there have been so many tips you've shared across lots of different conversations in this little meeting chat recording session we've done today. For those people who are looking to find out more about Abdul, you can follow him, as you can see on screen. If you're listening, then listen to me. Just follow Abdul on Twitter at Abdul Chohan. Obviously, we've talked about Shobi. You can access Shobi by either looking for it on the App Store or getting yourself over to shobi.com, where you can find lots more information about that too. And you can always head yourself over to youtube.com/Shobi app to get yourself onto their channel, subscribe, find out what opportunities there are for training there around there as well. But there are some other opportunities for training and support as well, aren't there, Abdul?
That's right, Mark. You just kind of reminded me. I was thinking, so part of my role has kind of been around professional development, making sure that teachers kind of use this effectively. So we launched a program called Shobi Certified Educators. So if you're a school that's already using Shobi, or you just want to kind of know a lot more about it and so on, you can go just search for Shobi Certified Educators on Google. You'll get a link for the registration, and it's absolutely free to apply. And there's a whole page of educators that are using this quite effectively. There's 4 modules that have been built in there. They're kind of focused around operational efficiencies. They focus around assessment and feedback. There's some about time-saving stuff that you can do as well, and so on. And then there's like a little quiz thing that happens at the end of that, and you score above a certain amount, you become a Shobi certified educator. You kind of end up on the website. You get connected to other Shobi certified educators from around the world as well. So that's a relatively new program. It's very pedagogically based rather than Shobi based. But yes, it does kind of marry the two up in terms of the potential to do this. And it's been done in collaboration with schools in Australia, with educators in different parts of the world, and so on. So absolutely on with that. And hopefully there'll be more to come on that front as well.
Brilliant stuff. Maybe like a level 2 or something, sort of move it up and sort of increase the sort of technical demand and complexity, perhaps. I don't know. But listen, our time is up. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and share with me today, Abdul. It's been really great to see and catch up with you again. I hope I get to bump into you IRL somewhere in the world in the not too distant future. Thanks so much for joining us, Abdul. Cheers.
Great to see you. Speak soon.
Yeah, you too, mate. Thanks.
Bye.